Well, thank you all very much, and welcome to the 12th of our Gresham lectures on net zero. And over the past 5 lectures this year, we've been talking about when net zero and the case for stopping global warming as soon as possible. I hope I've convinced you that it'd be a good idea to stop global warming as soon as possible, because every tenth of a degree matters. And in the last lecture, we were talking about how the longer we allow global warming to progress, the more likely it is that people will start to resort to the somewhat crazier solutions like solar geoengineering, which might actually have quite destabilizing political consequences. So if any other reason is needed, that's one to bear in mind, that we do need to turn this around as soon as we can. Less dramatic, but perhaps more immediate. So in these lectures, is how do we address the danger of net zero in the UK becoming the next Brexit issue? It already seems to be happening. People are seeing it as an opportunity to exploit as a wedge political issue. There's perhaps not very much we can do about those who are determined to find divisions wherever they can. I suppose we could vote against them. I couldn't possibly comment on who I'm talking about here. But I think the bigger question everybody who's interested in climate policy should be thinking about is, how do we avoid playing into the hands of those who are looking to make net zero a divisive issue? How can we design climate policies better so that the public feels more included in them? So when I was writing the outlines to these lectures last year, I was thinking I'd be talking more about the international justice questions, and we will touch on that in the lecture. But over the past year, net zero and inclusion in net zero policy has become a bigger and bigger issue in the UK, so I'm going to be thinking a bit about net zero in UK politics and what's happening there. It doesn't look like being that big an issue in the coming election, although it's already interestingly emerging in some corners of the UK. But I am really worried about what might happen in the election after this if the next administration is too cloth-eared about its implementation of climate policies. We could really see an emergence of a sort of US Republican-style climate denialist movement, which could land us in quite a sticky place in the 2030s. So, that's what we need to worry about. I mean, it's interesting. So I we'll highlight in this lecture the sort of risks of technocratic solutions, and ending up with a slogan that I hope we can perhaps all unite around. Let's come back onto that. Okay, because we're seeing things like this, the Sun's campaign to protect drivers from a rush to net zero. I do think people who hold up no net zero posters, so you want climate change forever? Probably not, but I think we need to actually raise the game a bit in political discussion around net zero, so that if you're going to say, I don't like these policies, well, what are the policies you do like? I mean, that's the issue we face. We've kind of got there with financial debate in politics. It's considered not very cool to offer completely unfunded, well, some people did, but it didn't work out. So when you make a promise, you're expected to say how you're going to pay for it. And I think we need to start thinking about the same point with net zero. If you're going to say, no, we're not going to have any nuclear power plants, okay, so what are you going to have? Or no, we're not going to have any solar farms, okay, so what are you going to have? I mean, we need the sort of arguments about net zero to be net zero, if you see what I mean. So if you want to take something off the table, you've got to put something on to balance it. We've also got to be very careful about things that are actually nothing to do with net zero, like the ULEZ, for example, being swept up into it. I mean, the impact of ULEZ, by the way, I think ULEZ is a fantastic idea. I've got a son with asthma. I think the cleaner London's air, the better. Please don't attack me afterwards, because I know lots of Londoners feel very strongly about the ULEZ. But this lecture is not about the ULEZ. But and that's important, that it's not about the ULEZ, in the sense that, I'm sure that those, this chap with the beard sort of standing on democracy there, and then subsequently embracing one of the candidates for the London mayorship, he probably feels that this is all part of this net zero plot, because he's been told by Sadiq Khan that ULEZ is all part of our net zero agenda. I said, no, it's not. The impact of ULEZ on UK emissions is probably quite minimal. It's a very good idea, but don't call it part of the net zero agenda, because it isn't. And so, this is a problem. So, perhaps an even more serious development quite recently in Scotland, the Unite Union has just launched a campaign to demand that Labour reconsider the ban on North Sea oil and gas extraction. Now, this is relevant to the net zero agenda, and this is one of the central planks of Labour's policies at the moment, which is they're not going to allow further oil and gas extraction in the North Sea. And Sharon Graham, the Unite chairwoman, Secretary General, has warned that oil and gas workers risk becoming the coal miners of our generation, and they're putting posters up all over Scotland saying "No ban without a plan," which actually is a pretty good slogan. I mean, I think we'd all be in favour of a plan, and so let's really think about what that plan could be. There is a real danger, I think, here, and this is what I mean about the danger of the next administration being too politically, I use the phrase cloth-eared, I hope that doesn't go down too badly with people, but if we're too insensitive about how net zero policies get presented, there's a real danger of lots of stuff getting blamed on net zero that's irrelevant, that's not directly relevant to net zero at all. So, for example, we all know, as a matter of geology, the number of jobs in North Sea oil and gas extraction is going to go down a lot in the next 20 years. But if policies are presented wrong in the next 2 years, all of those job losses will be blamed on net zero, regardless of whether they would have happened anyway. Because obviously, think about what happened to fishing. It's much easier for a fisherman to blame those evil EU bureaucrats setting quotas than it is to admit that their dad just overfished the fishery, overfished the North Sea. So, we run a serious risk of lots of transitional job losses that are going to happen anyway, getting blamed on environmental regulations just because it's convenient to blame those net zero policies rather than acknowledging what is actually happening to your industry. So that's the importance of symbolism here. It's the actual impact of Labour's decision about most of those hypothetical licenses they're not going to issue probably would never have produced oil and gas in the first place, now that prices have come back down to more normal levels. But the symbolism matters, and people will remember it. And, as evidence that symbols matter, remember that coal mine in Cumbria. I mean, rumour has it that the company that wanted to get this coal mine licensed a few months after COP26 wasn't really interested in the amount of coal it could produce at all. What they wanted to be able to say was Boris Johnson, while Britain held the presidency of COP26, was willing to license new coal mines so they could go away to other parts of the world where there was much more profitable coal mines to be licensed and get on with it. Symbols matter internationally as well. I mean, this is new gas pipeline infrastructure going in Guyana, a country that has very ambitious climate goals, has already declared that it's reached net zero, and you may be slightly surprised at that, but I remind those of you who are concentrating hard in the carbon cycle lecture of last year, okay, there you go, you'd have to concentrate in these lectures, you'll know how Guyana managed to declare that it's already got to net zero, thanks to the rather peculiar accounting rules we use for carbon. And they've also just discovered a huge amount of oil and gas off the coast. And there's actually quite a fun interview on Hard Talk you can watch where the president is being interviewed by BBC, Simon Sackler. Anyway, and he gives the journalist a very hard time indeed for questioning whether Guyana should really be pulling out all these fossil fuels. The reason I'm sort of raising this is it's very clear that the president of Guyana would be completely unimpressed by a decision by the UK to leave the remains of our oil and gas in the ground in the North Sea. So for him, I don't think that symbol, well, you can judge for yourself, watch the interview, but I don't think that symbol would have any resonance whatsoever. Which is why I think we could do much more things which would be much more powerfully symbolic with the remains of our North Sea oil and gas. So there are other things, anything we do with the UK's remaining fossil fuel reserves will be largely symbolic. In the grand scheme of things, we've already dug it up and burnt it. There's not that much left. In the grand scheme of global emissions, it's not that important. I know there's people in the room who worry about licensing of North Sea and so on. So, of course, it's but nevertheless, it's a small part of the global of global reserves, and so I think we should be thinking quite hard about its symbolic value and what we do with it. And there would clearly be very great symbolic value in being the first major economy to say we're going to keep it in the ground, we're just going to not pump it up at all. But I think there's something even more powerful that we could do with it, and we're going to come back to that. One thing I'm not going to talk about in this lecture is the sort of most important injustice of all, which is illustrated by this amazing pair of maps, which show you countries' contributions to global warming over the second half of the 20th century and their exposure in the top map, with the sort of size of the country scaled by its contribution, and in the bottom map, a country's vulnerability to climate impacts, with the size of the country scaled to its vulnerability or its the actual incidence for climate mortality due to climate-related diseases. Now you can see, the really striking thing is that how different the two maps look and how sort of squeezed and thin Africa is in the top map, and how dominant Africa and India are in the bottom map. So this is I wanted to show you this because it's quite memorable, and this is of course a very important injustice, but not something I'm going to talk about in this lecture. I'm not going to talk about the injustice of climate impacts. It is very important, but I want to talk about justice in climate solutions. So how do we ensure that the climate solutions we implement are inclusive and fair on everyone? Because there is a real problem that many of the solutions to climate, and I think we just have to take this head on and acknowledge it, many of the solutions to climate change that we talk about today, from parochial issues like replacing home heating systems or electrifying transport in the UK, have the potential, at least, if we're not careful, to exacerbate inequalities. And there's a good study published earlier this year by University of Leeds and York, looking at the sort of household and community participation in the transition to net zero, and in particular on its impact on low-income households. And the reason you realize why there's this danger of net zero policy exacerbating inequality is that if you look at this graph, this is income decile, so rich households, they've been normalized to the same number of people per household. So rich households over on the right, poor households on the left, and you'll see the sort of blackish wedge of what home heating, shelter and warmth is pretty much the same for everybody. So everybody spends the same amount, same absolute amount, not just same fraction of income, on heating their homes and so on, and generates the same, and the same amount of CO2 is generated. So in terms of the contribution to carbon footprint, so this is the amount of CO2 in the vertical, contribution to carbon footprint as a function of how wealthy you are. Then as we go across, your mobility, so travel and flights and so on, increases as you go up to the highest income households, and more and more of your carbon is generated by leisure activities and things which you could probably afford to do less of. And the crucial point of this is that if we require people to reduce their carbon footprint to net zero, which is effectively that's what net zero is all about, then it's going to have much more impact, relatively speaking, on, as it were, basic human needs like shelter and warmth for people on low incomes. And this is a well-rehearsed thing that people are well aware of, and this study sort of documents and quantifies it. It's even more striking, actually, when they looked at how ready UK neighbourhoods were for the transition to net zero. I think a Londoner would probably look at that and feel pretty smug. I mean, London is actually quite far ahead relative to the rest of the country because London already has a transport system, for all you may want to complain about it, it's getting there in terms of a decarbonisable transport system and so on. There's other parts of the UK are in much worse shape in terms of the transition to net zero. There's a lot of complexity behind that map, and there's a sort of they created this index of readiness for the transition. But the main striking point about it is that it's going to be given where we're at the moment, some parts of the UK are going to have to go further than others, so to speak, and it's already the kind of north-south, London, the rest of the country divide that has been such a problem in the past in terms of social divisions. And so the conclusions of this report were, transition to net zero requires change by households in every area of life, and without change to existing policies and strategies, new and unique inequalities will emerge. And so we need to be very careful about net zero. The main point of the report is we need to be very careful about net zero policies exacerbating inequalities. I totally agree with the second statement, but I would like to argue with them on the first one, and we'll come back to that as we go through this lecture. On a bigger scale, more global scale, another development in net zero policy that risks exacerbating inequality, now inequalities globally, is something called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which Europe is introducing in recognition of the fact that if Europe is imposing carbon pricing on heavy industry, then it'll be cheaper to produce steel in China than it is to produce it in Europe because there might be a lower carbon price in China. So Europe's solution to this is to introduce something called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which means that, in effect, if Brussels doesn't feel that your climate policies are good enough, then they impose a huge tariff on the imports. And it's starting off with a few high-carbon products like steel, cement, aluminium, and so on. But eventually, it would be escalated to a large range of products. And already, a lot of African countries are suddenly discovering that it's going to be difficult for them to export to Europe unless they can prove to Brussels that their climate policies are as good as Europe's. I was at a talk recently where somebody from the European Commission said, unprompted, of course, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism is not neo-colonialist. At which point you're like, really? Why did you say that? And that's the danger. It's already raising pretty serious hackles around the world. And it's just too easy for the Global Warming Policy Foundation to sort of caricature it as, the rich world putting up barriers gratuitously. I mean, it's this sort of thing that worries me about a very common framing around climate, which is the sort of climate emergency framing. And I should shout out to Alice Everett here, who's the one who sort of made me sort of think about this climate emergency framing a lot. So lots of people, in fact, some people tell you shouldn't talk about climate change anymore. You should only talk about the climate emergency. And apparently in Britain, we're one of the countries in the world where people believe in the climate emergency more than anywhere else in the world. I thought it was an interesting statistic, or at least it was a few years ago. The difficulty with this emergency framing is that people use emergencies to justify draconian measures. The first thing that people the first thing people do when there's when they've declared an emergency is they stop really bothering to consult very much. When Europe was in an energy emergency, which it was an emergency following the invasion of Ukraine, they dealt with it by building a bunch of new LNG import terminals. The way they got those through so fast in Germany, which is notoriously slow at making infrastructure decisions, they simply reduced the normal consultation period from 6 months to 6 days. You can make things happen if you declare an emergency. But the fundamental to the notion of an emergency is it's temporary. It's not the normal state of affairs. When you have a country in a state of emergency for decades, it generally means something's gone wrong. That the term's being abused. And climate is the kind of issue that will, unfold over decades. And so I worry about the emergency framing and we got to get on a wartime footing to address climate change because of the implications. So we don't need to worry too much about the details or asking people too many questions about whether they like the way we're going about it. We're just going to crack on and do it. Because in the end, climate policy is for everyone, and people have to be included. And what we cannot afford is to leave a rump, disenfranchised, rump of the electorate permanently disenfranchised by by climate policy. The most successful climate policy in Britain over the past 40 years was undoubtedly Mrs. Thatcher's decision to close down the coal industry. Now, imagine, fortunately, people only realized the climate benefits as an afterthought. But imagine if, back then, she'd been saying, I'm not going to try and imitate the voice, but there is no alternative, Mr. Scargill, but the Climate Change Committee says that in the fourth carbon budget, we close your coal mines. Imagine what would have happened to UK climate policy, or what the attitudes of the miners would have been. So, that's, it was effective, but it's not the way to do it. It left scars for a generation. We need to bring people along. And which means, and this is where, it's I'm really appealing to what you might call the climate establishment here, the people who work on climate policy, to think more about including people they don't normally talk to. The farmers, the fossil fuel industry, the people who are going to be affected by climate policy more in the implementation of climate policy. Because in the end, it's for everyone. Of course, it doesn't mean that everybody will benefit from climate policy. Some people will gain, some people will lose. But we need everybody to understand why we're doing what we're doing and why, therefore, the policies are being implemented, and not just told, well, we have to do this because it's what the latest scenarios from the Climate Change Committee or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change or whoever specify. We're going to talk a lot next year about specific climate solutions, but the particular issue I'm focusing on in this lecture is the bigger picture, the way climate solutions are presented as a package, as this is what the computer says we do. There's a lot of computer says net zero argumentation going on in climate policy, and there's one particular argument I want to pick up on is the notion of fair share. It's because it illustrates this problem the notion of fair shares of global emissions, of remaining global emissions, because it's just an example of in what I see as the dangers of doing policy by algorithm. So the Climate Action Tracker, an extremely influential NGO-led science-based initiative led out of Berlin. They make a lot of noise every year by grading countries. They focus on countries. They grade countries on their performance relative to 1.5 or 2 degree goals, and they give them a sort of orange, green, or red, generally red, score for how badly they're doing. And at the heart of this is the Climate Action Tracker's analysis of what is your fair share of global emissions. And a lot goes into this. And my colleague Lavanya Rajamani is actually, and by the way, I should stress, disagrees with me quite strongly on this part of the talk, is very interested, does a lot of thoughtful research on how you could allocate fair shares of emissions. And so this is a figure from a recent paper that she led, which shows there are many different. She's an international legal scholar, has been at the heart of climate policy formation for the past, for 20 years or so, heavily involved in the drafting of the Paris Agreement. And she points out there are many ways of determining what a country's fair share of emissions might be. What's their capability for reducing emissions, for example, as one of the things highlighted there? Or should we be aiming for equal emissions per head of population? So that's another criterion you could use. Or should we be looking at the responsibility of the country for the climate changes that have already happened, depending on how much they've emitted in the past, thinking back to those distorted maps I was showing you about countries' contributions to past emissions. And all of these are going to give you different answers and ranges of answers. And here's some illustrations of the range of answers you get for where emissions should be now, or at least in the past few years, relative to different ways of calculating countries' fair shares of ongoing emissions. And just to highlight one here, these are the G20 countries there. So the little black arrows are where the countries were, so what emissions were relative to what they were in 2010. So it's were emissions going up or down and so on. So if it's below 100%, emissions had gone down since 2010 in that country. But the orange and blue bars are where, if you were actually calculating what that country's fair share of emissions was, they should have gone. And you'll notice that the UK really should be well below zero by now. So if it were fair, we wouldn't be emitting at all. We'd be taking CO2 back out of the atmosphere. We'd be putting all our energy into that. We'd be past net zero already for it to be fair. The only two countries that come out sort of more or less close to their fair share are India and Indonesia, of course, because many of these fair share principles invoke equal per capita rights, and of course these are countries with huge populations and relatively small historical responsibilities. That's all very reasonable, but I actually have a fundamental problem with this sort of fair share analysis, because it's sort of the kind of tenet of it, and the discussion with Lavanya goes on, and of course she's a lawyer, so I'm sure it'll end badly for me. But my worry about it is it sort of implies that by virtue of our existence, we all have a right to do irrevocable harm to the global environment. And when you sort of think about it, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And Lavanya would argue that I'm caricaturing their position, and fair enough. But in a sense, if you say you're going to allocate emission rights per capita, that's the implication. That we're going to cause some harm, so let's just sort of divvy up the harm as fairly as we can. And, Lavinia would argue it's more about the shares of effort, so to speak, fair shares of effort. But if you're going to require the rich to do more, by implication, relatively speaking, you're requiring the poor to do less. So, because of course the total amount that needs to be done is set by basic physics. So, no matter how you cut it, you've got to work out this sort of allocation problem. And as I say, I think they may be. My feeling is they're asking the wrong question. At least in the climate action tracker, they're very explicit about what they're doing, and that the crucial point is here that these bars are very wide, and any decision about what's the fair share is inevitably very subjective. It's going to depend on lots of things that won't be transparent to your ordinary voter. And so if you suddenly turn around and tell the British voter, we've done this fair share analysis and we decided we have to stop emissions tomorrow, it's going to be like, well, who did the analysis? Telling them that, I've run the model is not going to work. At least the climate action tracker is sort of explicit about it. There's another initiative, similar lines, but targeting companies rather than countries, called the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and which we'll be coming back to in one of our lectures next year. And they use scenarios, complicated scenarios coming out of integrated assessment models, which are these coupled models of the global climate economy system, to work out what a sector should be doing. So sort of how much should emissions be coming down in the oil, in the steel sector, and then compare a company's performance to what should be happening within that sector. And we'll get it, these are detailed and complex calculations. We'll get into sort of how that works next year. But the crucial problem is, deep in these integrated assessment models, there are all kinds of assumptions about what is fair. Because the models, although these models they're not explicit about the fact they're looking for allocating shares, they still calculate a least cost way of achieving a climate goal globally, which means you've got to, in order to calculate the least cost way of doing something globally, you've got to allocate effort to different countries. And so you've got to have an algorithm in the model that somehow allocates that effort. So there's no getting away from it. The modeler has somehow made some decisions that resulted in an outcome that meant, this sector has to do more, this sector has to do less, and so on. Or this sector has to move first. So some of these estimates of cost are pretty straightforward. I mean, the cost of replacing coal power stations with nuclear power stations is you can document that. It's harder to say put a cost on the impact on nuclear proliferation, for example. But again, you can imagine ways of doing that. Others are much more subjective. I mean, what's the cost of reducing flying? How do you assign a cost to that if that's something we have to do in order to achieve net zero? Or how do you balance, the value of flying with the value of being able to drive to work? Or and again, because all these assumptions are there deep in the sort of engine rooms of these integrated assessment models, it's very difficult to take the output of one of these models and turn around to a voter and say, well, this is what we've got to do because that's what the model says. We need to do a much better job of explaining why we need to do what we know, and not just relying on these scenarios and saying, well, we have to do this because that's the scenario. I mean, we need to change the conversation. We need to change the conversation away from this negative argument about how much harm are you allowed to still cause, to a positive argument about if you've got the capacity, how do we fix the problem and who has the duty to fix it? I think that's the big transition media debate. So I've been being quite negative up till this point, so now I'm going to try and be positive. I always try to be positive in these lectures. So I'm grumbling about this negative framing of arguing about, who's exceeded their fair share of causing harm. I think the way we can change the conversation is to ask, how do we fix the problem? And who's got the capacity to fix it? And how do we put policies in place to fix it as quickly as possible? Because, so if we look at some of the scenarios coming out of these integrated assessment models, this is what actually happens in these scenarios. So some things are pretty straightforward. This is what happens to coal use in scenarios that meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. Okay, we stop using coal. That's a pretty simple message that is easy to communicate. And so therefore, if somebody's working in the coal industry, that's not really consistent with meeting the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement. So that's something which can be sort of straightforwardly explained to anybody. There's many other reasons why we need to wind down our global. There's so many other harms coal does, as well as affecting the climate. But and the reason, by the way, that we have this drop-off of coal in these scenarios is, of course, these scenarios are looking for least cost pathways to achieve net zero. So not only does coal get clobbered because it's quite high carbon, but also it's just not even competitive relative to solar and wind for electricity generation in many parts of the world. So it just doesn't make any sense to use it anymore. So the argument for phasing out coal is overwhelming. Oil use is much more nuanced. We do reduce the amount of oil we produce and use, but it's down by about 2/3 or so. And then there's a big spread, anywhere from close to zero to only about half where we're at today. Gas is even more all over the place. We have some scenarios in which gas use even climbs in these net zero scenarios. And of course, the way in which those are net zero scenarios is that the remaining use of fossil fuels, all of the fossil fuel use that's happening after 2050 is fully compensated for by capture of the carbon dioxide that's generated and injection back underground. So when we see, so just bearing in mind that picture and the enormous spread of the possible futures for the global gas industry, we have to ask ourselves, when we hear news like this one, a very important climate justice case in the past few years, in which a court in the Netherlands, so these are the lawyers celebrating, following a court decision in the Netherlands requiring Shell to reduce the total amount of carbon dioxide generated by both its activities and the products it sells by 45% relative to 2010. So it was just required to reduce its overall size. It wasn't given any options on this. It was required to reduce its overall size by around a factor of 2. Now, the difficulty with this is, and it's needless to say, Shell are appealing, and the difficulty with this decision by the court is that Shell's counter-argument is, and they weaken their own argument by not being very coherent either, but the counter-argument they were making was they wanted to be measured by the carbon intensity of the products they sold. So they were looking to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide generated per liter of petrol sold or per BTU of gas sold. That was their preferred metric, and the court said, no, we're not happy with that. We're just going to say you've got to reduce by 45% in total. And they based that 45% on the scenarios, the average of the scenarios in the IPCC's 1.5 degrees report. But you can see, Shell, an oil and gas, more and more a gas company, could easily point to this and say, but the scenarios are all over the place. Why does the court have any right to say this is the one that's relevant to this company when that company's oil and gas production is only a few percent of the world's total? So who knows how it's going to pan out? I mean, as I say, the appeals happened, and it's we'll get a finding later this year, and I'm sure the finding will be appealed again. So it's going to continue. But the difficulty with this is that if these cases start to succeed, the net result. I mean, Shell have already moved their headquarters to London because one of the reasons they say is because they're grumpy about this case. I don't know if that was a part of the argument. But you know, one of the potential consequences if these cases start to succeed is that we will push oil and gas production ever more into companies that are just immune from litigation, companies like Gazprom or Aramco, or where there's just no point in trying to sue them. Back to trying to be positive. What can we think of? What can we think of as a climate policy that all of these groups could potentially agree on? So, groups wanting to end fuel poverty, Unite wanting no ban without a plan, and the Just Stop Oil campaigners. And the slogan I'd suggest that you might like to mull over and think about is justice for the fossil fuel industry. Because I would argue that, and justice of course cuts both ways, remember, because I would argue that the greatest injustice, the greatest climate injustice of all, is the fact that we have the most profitable industry the world has ever known, by far, that is making its money selling a product that's causing a very serious problem, and nobody is even asking them to fix it. In fact, they seem to have got away with the fact that, oh yeah, they'll fix the problem, but only when the taxpayer pays them to clean up. Imagine if Thames Water did that. Well, it's kind of what Thames Water are trying to do. And I think we need to be, and ironically, so many people in the climate debate are perpetuating this situation. The sort of anti-ULEZ campaigner on the one hand is they think they're defending their right to drive, they're actually defending their right to sit in a traffic jam and contribute to an oil and gas company's profits. The Just Stop Oil protester who's glued to the gantry, they think they're sort of bringing forward the demise of the fossil fuel industry. They probably don't know that the fossil fuel industry executives that I've talked to are perfectly comfortable with people saying phase out fossil fuels. They say that's fine. We'll go with we'll just sell them in the meantime. Apparently they're going to be phased out. They're fine with that message. Indeed, I've even had them tell me to my face, we can't invest in carbon capture because the world's decided to transition away from fossil fuels. So it would be too risky for us to invest in that, knowing full well they're investing in oil and gas fields that won't be producing until the 2040s. So we're just giving them an excuse to carry on doing nothing when we could be requiring them to get on with actually doing something, which is stopping the product they sell from causing further global warming. Because they absolutely know how to do it. They claim they know how to do it. They should be required just to get on with it. And this is what, I'm not calling for heads on stakes or reparations or anything like that. I'm just asking for them to clean up after themselves, clean up after the product they sell. And this is, in effect, we've already decided this. We've decided Britain will be net zero by 2050, which means, in effect, that no one will be allowed to sell a product that causes global warming in Britain after 2050. And yet nobody's put it that way. And 2050 is only 25 years away. So any company whose main line of business is selling products that cause global warming directly should have filed a plan already with the Department of Energy and Net Zero, Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful, saying how they're going to stop the product they sell from causing global warming. And it's not good enough to say, oh, no, we're just going to stop selling it in 2049, which is kind of the kind of plans, that's the level of ridiculousness of some of their plans at the moment. They're just saying, oh, yeah, we're just going to carry on selling it in line with society is the line they like to use. And don't worry, we'll be net zero by 2050 because we won't be doing any of that stuff anymore. But in the meantime, we're just going to carry on. So both Shell and BP have just revised upwards their production plans for the early 2030s, but they're still fully committed, apparently, to net zero by 2050. Really? How? And they're not making any effort to explain how they're going to get from the 2030s to the 2050s. And nobody's asking them to, which is bizarre. So, as I say, this is the by the way, I mentioned that coal mine earlier on. Interesting, when they put their planning application in, they were consistent with net zero by 2050 because the planning application for the coal mine only runs till 2049. I kid you not. That was explicitly in that. Somebody was just taking the mick. Which brings us back to what do we do about North Sea licenses? So what constructively could Labour do? Labour could promise, instead of banning new extraction, to make any extraction, and indeed any import of fossil fuels, into the UK conditional on safe and permanent disposal of the carbon dioxide it generates. And if they required companies to do that within UK territorial waters, it would create a bonanza of jobs in the North Sea, getting rid of CO2. It would create that world-leading carbon capture and storage industry overnight that government ministers keep telling us we're going to have and then tell us we have to pay for it. No. The industry's making plenty of money. They should just get on with it. And of course, they'll immediately scream, and the Daily Mail will no doubt go nuts over the fact that this will make fossil fuels more expensive. A 10% take-back requirement, so a requirement on the industry to get rid of 10% of the carbon dioxide generated by the products it sells, which is where we need to be by the early 2030s if we're going to be on track for 100% by 2050, would add 0.1 penny to the cost of a kilowatt hour of natural gas, which is less than you save by shopping around. So, and by the way, there's no need for them to pass all that cost on anyway. They're making plenty of money. They will insist they will because they'll want to scare people. But you need to push back on that and say, well, why not just pay and get on with it? Of course, in the long term, if you require the fossil fuel companies to stop the process itself from causing global warming, then fossil fuels will get more expensive. There's absolutely no getting away from it. Fossil fuels that don't cause global warming are more expensive than fossil fuels that do. We need to be straight with people and say that's what net zero means. But it also means then, if once we've set out a plan to stop fossil fuels from causing global warming, it means all of the other things we have to do, like electrifying transport, like insulating our homes better, like installing heat pumps and so forth, the case for them becomes nothing to do with net zero at all. It becomes energy security. I noticed recently, by the way, that the Department of Energy and Department of Energy Security and Net Zero is now just called Energy Security in the emails. And the point is, the government is clearly sensitive to the fact that people probably care more about energy security than they care about net zero. I'm not going to argue with that. I'm saying, okay, if they've made that analysis, let's make it very clear that most of the things we have to do to achieve net zero, once we've decided we're going to stop fossil fuels from causing global warming, all of the other decisions we have to make are essentially energy security decisions. They're to make sure that we actually, having decided that fossil fuels are going to be made safe for the planet, and therefore they're going to get more expensive, we better invest in some alternatives because it's insecure to continue relying exclusively on them at the level we do. And of course, if this policy were coordinated internationally, it's actually unclear how much of the cost the industry would actually be able to pass on, because, as I say, the cost of the price of fossil fuels is set by what the market will bear, not by what they cost to produce and deliver. A stat that I always like to remind people of is the amount of money the industry has made. Much of it, of course, was in tax, not pure profits to private corporations. The amount of money the industry has made since 2020 would have been more than enough to capture every single molecule generated by the products it sells and all of its activities and stick it back underground. And this still left plenty of money left over. They would still have made a healthy profit. So the money is there. Climate change is a choice. And we could we could, if we could get agreement from the various people involved in this conversation that the one thing we really want is justice for the fossil fuel industry, we could club together to achieve that outcome. Lots of people insist to me that, it's not that simple, Myles, it's much more complicated than that. It's not really. We just need to stop fossil fuels from causing global warming. I mean, if we can get behind this, then we don't need to sort of resort to computer says net zero type arguments to explain to people why they have to give up their internal combustion engine cars by X date and so on. It just makes sense to give up your internal combustion engine car because you can anticipate fossil fuels getting more expensive. So drive electric instead. If we refocus the conversation on simple principles, like this principle of producer responsibility for fossil fuels, we might be able to diffuse these arguments from becoming as toxic as they could over the next 20 years. And we need to do it. It's urgent that we need to do this because net zero is rapidly running into danger of becoming the next big divisive issue in the UK. So, sobering thought to end on, but there's a solution. Thank you.
One has asked, could CBAM in the UK and the EU stimulate a programme of global taxes which would then even out and responsibility around the world taken for carbon emissions?
Well, I mean, that's the idea, but the difficulty is that it's essentially the EU and UK taking it upon themselves to tell Namibia what carbon tax it should set. And I suspect the government, or certainly if looking at that hard talk interview with the president of Guyana, I think you're going to get some pretty hard pushback on that. So the difficulty with that is that somebody's decided this is the right level to set the carbon tax. And that's a subjective decision. There's so many sort of imponderables in what is that right level that it's very hard to justify one level over another. Whereas because of course it's going to depend on the circumstances of the country, what a level of carbon tax does to emissions. Some countries will have much more, we'll get into all this sort of stuff next year, but some countries will have much more elastic emissions than others. So I don't want to put you off I've just put you off next year's lectures, haven't you? But don't worry, we'll get into this kind of stuff. Economists can't wait, I'm sure. But therefore, this kind of imposition of climate policy on the world through things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism, I think is very dangerous. And as I said, if you have to defend your policy by saying it's not neo-colonialist, you've already got a problem.
I just wanted to ask in terms of SBTI brought out they changed their methodology to include carbon offsetting, and then there was huge pushback, and then they backtracked on that. What are your thoughts on that?
Please come to my lecture next year on carbon offsetting. It's a huge topic, and it's... but the fact, it's. Can I just sort of parry that one with, it's really interesting that conversation's happening, because on the one hand, and a positive thing, it shows that meeting science-based targets is hard. So companies are having to really think about it. The negative side is companies are now effectively trying to wriggle out of it because a lot of carbon offsets available today, they're very cheap because they don't really mean anything. If something doesn't mean anything, it's very cheap. And that's the problem. And that's why there was so much pushback on bringing in a wave of offsets into science-based targets, because the impact then on emissions of the whole thing would become minimal. But we'll get into that next year, promise.
You haven't said explicitly how this would happen. I think you're suggesting carbon capture and storage. But that's hardly a given thing. There's a huge amount of skepticism, isn't there? That it's speculative.
It's 19th century chemistry, and the industry's been doing it for decades. The industry would love you to think that it's a bit tricky and they could do with another 10 years of massive subsidies to really prove it. But just don't listen to them. They're wrong. They can do it today.
But the scale of it is minute at the moment.
The scale is minute because nobody's incentivized to do it at the moment. The only reason anybody does carbon capture at the moment is because some government pays them to do it. And because governments haven't got unlimited pockets, they haven't done that very often. If the industry were, people within the industry have said to my face, of course, if we had to do it as a licensing condition of selling fossil fuels, we'd just do it. They were almost insulted that I would even think that they would do anything else. Yeah, sure.
What kind of carbon price would be economical?
What kind of carbon price? Well, the cost of getting to so if you want to get to a fairly high, 20-30% of the CO2 that we generate is relatively easy to capture from point sources. That's pretty cheap. That's sort of 50 odd pounds per ton of CO2. And the reason people aren't putting this carbon capture in at the moment is because even when the carbon price wobbles over that level, they're not confident enough that it'll stay over that level, and these plants have to be built and they have to run for decades, and that's why, people aren't willing to bet against them. The other reason, of course, is that they think if they sit around for long enough, they'll get a subsidy instead, so why bother to invest when somebody else might pay for it? There's a whole raft of reasons why it's not happening, but they're all on the policy. There's nothing wrong with the technology. We've just yet to come up with a clear and unavoidable reason why people have to do it. And that's why I would advocate a very, very simple thing that Labour could do, which would have a dramatic impact on the world, would be to say, if you want to dig it up, if you want to import it into Britain, you've got to start putting away the CO2. Now just get on with it. We're not going to give you any more subsidies. And if they were to do that, you can start small, only 1 or 2% right away. That would immediately transform the CCS industry, because as you say, it's tiny at the moment. So just a sort of 1 or 2% requirement would crank it up immediately. And 10% by the early 2030s would be perfectly feasible for the industry. I mean, the industry themselves, they say, we could do this. But then they say there's no business case. It's like, make a business case. Require them to do it. There's no stronger business case than a license to operate.
I'm going to dumb down the question slightly, because I've spoken to a lot of the people on the other side, people like Piers Corbyn, Alex Jones, and generally, do you think they generally believe what they say? Because they generally take, or is it tribal politics? Because they generally take the opposition view on everything, the anti-vax. Some of them don't even believe that the earth is round and whatever, whatever you say, they say the opposite because that's what their tribe says. Or do you think they actually believe that climate change is not real?
I think there's not many people left that believe climate change isn't real. Plenty of people who are kind of into the sort of have your cake and eat it idea that, well, climate change is real, but it's not going to cause any harm, so we may as well just carry on emitting for another few decades. That's sort of more the position people are taking. But, I think, do they believe that, or is it just a position they've kind of talked themselves into? I don't know. I can't really get inside their heads. But people do, but one thing I could say, very highly relevant to the topic of this lecture, is people do talk themselves into positions. And once somebody's talked themselves into a position of, once somebody started holding up a placard, suspiciously well-printed placard, I might say, saying no net zero, it's very hard to talk them down from that. So that's why, back to the theme of this lecture, we need to get ahead of this before we have factions developing who define their identity as hating net zero, whatever the heck that means. We need to sort of get ahead of it and explain to people that, net zero is not a threat to your way of life. It's something we can all get behind, which is a fossil fuel industry cleaning up the mess after itself. Who's going to object to that? Somebody putting up a placard saying, no, preserve the profits of the fossil fuel industry. Good luck with that placard.
I'm afraid we've run out of time for this evening. And one of the things we've been able to demonstrate comprehensively, once again, is actually the science of climate change is always surpassed by the human issues around it. And one of the reasons the debate is so vigorous is because people are difficult. We should never lose sight of that. But ladies and gentlemen, it's been a fascinating evening. Please join me in thanking our lecturer this evening, the Frank Jackson Foundation Professor of the Environment, Professor Myles Allen.
Thank you.
Thank you.